Welcome, partners, to the latest edition of In the Hot Seat, a panel discussion focused on how technology is being used to solve today's problems. These panel discussions are part of ScanSource's Discover Opportunity initiative, and today I'm joined by three industry experts who are going to help you, our mutual customers, discover opportunities for your customers in the government space. So let's start by meeting our panelists. Tony, I will start with you.
Thank you. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm with JABRA, and I'm a business development manager that is focused primarily on helping channel partners as they work through government solutions and government contracting. So,
Lars?
Yes, my name is Lars HOHMANN. I'm with Zebra Technologies. I'm an account manager for the federal market, and I cover specifically the DoD.
Last but not least, Steve.
My name is Steve Donovan. I'm with EXACQ Technologies. I'm a sales director, and we obviously sell into the government all day long. So I'm excited to be here.
Yep, great. Yeah, thank you, the three of you, for joining us. This is Three's Wild here, three-part panel. We have two other topics that we're going to cover with some of our other suppliers as part of this series. So we invite you partners, if you enjoyed today's session, to make sure you check in on the other two. The topic for today is looking at the rapid adoption of IT, in this case by government agencies, by government entities, public sector, et cetera. Digital transformation was forced upon everyone, and those in the government space are not immune from that. So I'd love to go kind of round table here with the three of you, and let's just start on looking at where dollars are being spent in this space. What types of investments are government entities making in technology right now?
Well, I'll jump in real quick. As you mentioned, I think last year taught not only enterprise markets, but public sector, where their holes were and where gaps were in delivery of services, and whether or not that was directly for their employees, delivering service to their employees, but their actual clients that they might have around the US, around the world. I think the modernization of public sector from an IT standpoint is where a lot of dollars are going right now. I think the holes that they saw trying to move into a hybrid or a remote environment really kind of gave them the information that they needed to move away from maybe some of just the standard operating that they were doing, and force them into an area to say there are some legacy systems that we have that we can't grow them, we can't expand them. So the modernization of those, both from the desktop all the way back to the server room and to the cloud, I really see a lot of emphasis going there, where you're seeing a lot more projects written to that extent to just modernize and remove legacy systems. So I think that's where we see a lot of dollars being promoted within the public sector environment.
Yeah, and more specifically, we're seeing a lot of security-related replacements and upgrades. So as you're, upgrading that infrastructure into a 21st century infrastructure, security is a big issue, and protecting the data collected out on the edge of the IT enterprise is critical. Like, we're hearing that, the current administration is very focused on funding cybersecurity upgrades in their 2022 budget, and we're seeing dollars spent to address asset inventory, warehouse management across the federal market. And there's an older portfolio of Windows-based rugged mobile computers that we offer, and in this area of the federal market that still need to be replaced out on the Android platform to meet security requirements. So that's an area that we're seeing a lot of need.
Yep. Steve, how about you?
Yeah, sure. On the video security side, the government obviously has been using video for a long time, but the convergence of the IT side of our product line, with cybersecurity and the cloud and all the advancements that have been made on the video side of the house. We have a lot of hybrid solutions out there that they're taking advantage of, keeping some of their infrastructure and migrating over to the network. But all the money that's been involved has been loaded into the schools recently, public courts. The video market has been going up for years and years and years, and the government's really no exception. So there's been lots of funding out there, and we've been very, very busy in the vertical.
Yeah, Steve, I'm going to stay with you here just to get your thoughts on this. But Both Lars and Tony mentioned this also, which is interesting because we see the question is how much of the infrastructure is being reused versus replaced. And with our ScanSource's background in the physical security space, also in the communication space, also in fill in the blank spaces, we've seen the shift from analog to IP. We've seen the shift from analog to SIP and all those things in the communications world. But a lot of that stuff ran on the same backbone, and we didn't have to make an infrastructure adjustment necessarily to invest in new technology. But in the video surveillance space, I think that's a very relevant decision when making purchasing. So what are you guys seeing as far as reuse versus replace?
Yeah, it's a great question. That really goes from, it depends on the customer, where the location, and just about funds. We have lots of hybrid situations out there. We do heavy infrastructure on the State Department side, where they're doing lots of hybrid still. They're still using some of that technology. Costs a lot of money to replace all that cabling. So we do have solutions for both. So,
yep.
But you also see that technology has been out there for 10, 20, 30 years. And at that point, they're looking at the IT side of the house to piggyback on the network that they put in over the years and go from analog to IP. And that's probably more 20-30% of the installations going on. So it is across the board, the spectrum of the customer, but it comes to dollars and cents. And I do see more networks in place that can handle the load of video.
Yeah. Lars or Tony, any comments from you guys on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a focus on replacement. The Biden administration is going to have a big budget focused on, replacing the infrastructure. And I think that, we have many devices out there that are still running on the mobile's window embedded platform. That's a security issue that's being addressed or it needs to be addressed in a lot of the agencies. So I'm hearing folks also in leadership talking about wanting to move to being a 21st century IT infrastructure. So, to me, that sounds like, really, replacement and really improving the infrastructure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think where, the biggest key is the budgetary dollars that are associated with it. Being fiscally responsible or having the budget to do it. Where you can replace, I think they're replacing. It's part of that modernization strategy, and it's part of getting legacy systems out that can't be replicated or grown. So, to Steve's point, there's some places where there's not an option, where there are an option. I think that they're making wise decisions as to what they can do moving forward. And we know budgets were strained last year from, especially at the local and state level, from sales tax dollars not being what they were in years past. So I think there's quite a few things on the table that agencies are trying to evaluate through to see what's the best decision for them. And budget, of course, in public sector is always a key parameter. So I agree.
Yeah, I mean, budgeting is always, big issue there. So yeah, that it all depends on that, of course.
Yeah, but budget and funding, right? We can solve anything if we got the dollars. Yep.
That's right.
Kind of, let's stay on that topic. Our audience for these panel discussions are our mutual customers, our partners that buy through ScanSource. And we hope that there are some partners viewing this who don't have an install base in government, and that they're looking to capitalize on some of the opportunities you guys are going to tell us about today. So let's stick in the budgeting and purchasing realm. How quickly are purchasing decisions made by government agencies, government entities, public sector?
I'll jump in on that one. The process, the RFP process on the video side does take some time, but what's been very interesting over the last couple of years, I think Tony kind of touched on this, is that we've seen projects that were out there for, 2 years now being funded. So specifically in some of the correction verticals, you've had POs come in over the last 6 months that were projects that were parked, so to speak. But in general, it is a process, and, we do have good dealers and integrators that are well aware of that process. So depending on when they get involved in the sales process, could be 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's very, dependent on the critical nature of the project or the program. I know that A lot of quick buys did happen, especially I believe at the VA related to COVID. So issues like that, high priority projects should be streamlined through the procurement process and can be acquired and deployed in a much shorter time frame if it's necessary. But more typical IT projects will go through the typical federal procurement process, and depending on the size of the project, it can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. With larger projects, of course, having a longer sales cycle and deployment cycle.
Yeah, I would agree. I think last year, we all got a little spoiled because we got a little bit of emergency spending and quick turnarounds on things that items that the government needed just to continue doing work in a normal fashion. And we're seeing a lot more of this going back to the process of, getting into the projects and doing the normal evaluation, validation of, any product or solution that they're looking for. So, we're getting back to that normal, request for information, request for, proposal type solution sell to the public sector, where it could potentially take 6+ months, even for something that we, find in our world to be a very simple task to move through. The validation for the tax dollars being spent is being put back in place, and we're getting back to a normal sales cycle within public sector. So I would agree with both Steve and Lars' points.
Yeah, I guess getting back to normal in this case you might go like, oh, we were there, we were spending money as we found it. Now we're back into 6 to 12 month cycles, but it is what it is. I mean, that's the reason we do these education series. Everyone knows what they're getting themselves into looking at this base.
Kyle, can I just make one comment on that, please?
Yeah.
We have lots of dealers that tried to get into the government space, but I think, one thing of note, because I think some people might make a rush to judgment to get into the government vertical. It is a commitment, and there's definitely some long-term play in that. So some just 2-nickel advice for some of the people listening out there. You have to make a commitment. It's not a run and gun game.
Yeah. And that's where I wanted to go here, is to get the three of your views on what advice to give partners that want to sell into these spaces. This is alphabet soup in an industry that already is full of acronyms. There's FedRAMP, there's TAA, public sector has its own funding and spend requirements. So help us navigate that, Steve, Lars, Tony. If partners do want to play the long game and get into industries that are government in nature, how do they navigate all the requirements, all the rules and regulations?
Well, I mean,
go ahead, Lars.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the obvious first one is you have to have the contracts, the buying vehicles available for the customer out there, and at least in the federal market. So, that's key. I mean, I was just reading that, these GWAC contracts are being used more and more, whether it's SOUP or GSA or other, government-wide acquisition contracts. I mean, that's the way everything's going today, especially for, buys here and there and some smaller purchases and regular purchases that are taking place in the market.
Yeah, Lars almost took the words out of my mouth. I mean, the first step is understanding the contracting processes and the procurement process, and the avenues that you need to be able to sell to the government. That kind of your first step. And I think understanding the purchase process, either from a contracting officer or procurement officer, and getting those in place. There's not a lot of room or tolerance for not following the rules within the government public sector arena. So you need to know the processes, you need to follow those processes so you don't find yourself at the end of a successful campaign of winning business from the government, and then you get challenged by a competitor as to whether or not you actually met the requirements, and potentially losing a deal because of something simple. So I think that's a key. Knowledge of the procurement process is a first step for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I mean, that's what I was kind of getting at in my first comment. I think a lot of people might not take the time to understand the rules and the regulations, and it's imperative for success. So, there's lots of opportunity, and there's opportunity for all. But I think it's just, you got to understand what you're getting into and really educate yourself. The information's all out there. It's readily available, but make sure somebody becomes your resident expert on that procurement process to understand what you're getting into.
Yeah. And we haven't even talked about technology much in the last 15 minutes. We've just talked about how to acquire it, which is perfect. This is exactly what we're trying to communicate here. All right, so let's wrap up. Tony, I'll start with you. I'll just come down the line. What technology areas are you seeing that are on the horizon or that are happening right now? These are growth opportunities for partners. We're again kind of back to the beginning, but where dollars are being spent. But what's the immediate opportunity?
Unified communications is really big right now in public sector because they were so office focused for so many years, and last year taught them that they need to be able to support remote workers and be able to do data, integration and data transfer seamlessly across multiple platforms, outside of hardline, telephones, and communicating that way through email or so forth. And which, when you say unified communications, immediately, projects, like Zoom that we're doing this call on, or Teams or something like pops to mind. But there's a lot of backbone that goes with that as well. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be looked at from a public sector. So the drag behind us looking at, our technologies going into a unified communications project, there's a lot of business for a lot of different partners and manufacturers to support those projects and those goals of those public sector entities. So from a job, speaking from a pure JABRA standpoint, that's one thing that we see, but it ties into so many other technology industries and manufacturers that it as Steve said, there's a lot of business for a lot of people around single projects.
The problems in the technology aren't different. It's the purchasing vehicles that make this unique, right? Lars, same thing for you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, in the federal market, we cover a lot of different verticals as a company. Zebra does, from transportation and logistics, healthcare, asset and inventory management, and the federal government has requirements in each of those areas. So, we have, technologies that track stuff and people. So, one of the areas that we're seeing a lot more interest recently is, moving away from the barcode a bit, but there's a lot of interest in radio frequency identification. We're seeing a good amount of interest in this technology to move forward into the future because it's an easier way to track and manage assets and inventory across the civilian and the DoD market. So, we have a strong portfolio of technologies in that area, and we're seeing a lot of interest in that currently.
Yeah, and Steve, I've seen the case studies you guys have on your government landing page, but I think there's opportunity here for your partners too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, video, like the other products on the call, is across verticals. So some of the hot ones, education is always huge in the public sector. There's lots of money going into that again. We've had lots of success with some of the corrections in the courts on there, some state and local courts. That's an example of them actually revamping, their whole system, going from an analog to IT. But, my advice is, to get involved in that procurement process, understand the verticals and attack them, but it's really across the board for the video products and what's available.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Thank you again, Tony, Lars, and Steve for joining us today. Partners, again, as I mentioned at the top, we're doing a three-part series here focused on the government space. We have another session on meeting the needs of the citizen. And so we'll talk more about public sector there, obviously. And then another session on always on collaboration. Gold stars, definitely, Lars, for mentioning security. I love that you brought that up as early as you did too, because that's one of the topics we just can't talk about enough. And I love the conversation. I learn as I come into these things a lot more than I knew when I started as a moderator. So Tony and Steve, you both hit some real good points on purchasing vehicles, budgeting, changes in legislation. So thank you again for all three of you for joining us today. Partners, you can find this content and more on www.scansource.com/government. you can always contact your ScanSource account manager or account executive, or give someone on my team a call if you're looking to build solutions. So with that, I will close us out and say thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.